Our office administers the ESA and CSA programs. The ESA program, enacted in 2021, accepted students in the 22-23 school year. Indiana's ESA provides up to $20,000 to K-12 students with disabilities and their siblings who meet the income requirement of 400% free and reduced meal rate. ESA grant must be used on private school tuition, curriculum, services, therapies, transportation, training programs and camps, and assessments. We have a $10 million appropriation each year in the current budget. Student funding represents 90% of the per student state funding for the Student School Corporation of Residents and 100% of the special education services amount. Siblings who do not require special education services receive state funding allocation. There were 555 students who participate in the program in the 23-24 school year, and we're looking to maximize that to the $10 million appropriation this year. The CSA program, enacted in 23, accepted students about 6 weeks later in 23 school year. 3 agencies administer the CSA program: the Commission for Higher Education, the Department of Education, and the Treasurer of State. The CSA program is universal for 10th, 11th, 12th grade students to pursue career interests through an internship, apprenticeship, applied learning experience towards obtaining a credential of value. The motivation behind the program is supporting employee-led work-based learning programs, addressing barriers for entry for students, as well as providing students with opportunities that address generational poverty. We are the only state that administers a CSA program. This program also has a $10 million appropriation, $5,000 grant per student per year, supporting 2,000 students. CSA funding supports program courses, certification and credentialing exams, post-secondary education and training, equipment required for the apprenticeship, and transportation to get to their work-based learning program. So let's talk about the accomplishments. These are the fun things to talk about. So when you put the students first, you always win. Keeping parents in control of ESA funds by reducing friction of paperwork on parents and providers. So we stream the invoicing process and payment process for creating an endorsement process from the parents for our agency to direct pay students' tuition, and for CSA student employer partners. In addition, payments to providers are paid in 3 days versus the original 45-day settlement contract. That was a win. We replaced the existing platform with a custom application portal inclusive of administration and reporting infrastructure. It was a $500,000 taxpayer annual saving. We also have our legal team on call. Whether it's program eligibility, busting barriers, or policy creation, if we can get to yes for the family and students, we definitely do. So let's talk about a few of the challenges and key learning outcomes that we have implemented in Indiana. So convincing private schools to accept ESA funds with a robust state voucher program, we hired a community outreach manager. This is our salesperson that increased providers from 400% year over year for our families to access. Parents, guardians of students with a disability are the most passionate citizens you will ever encounter. Prepare for formal complaints from ESA students, parents aligned with special education service rules and regulations. To support the students, we built a relationship with the Indiana Department of Education to develop an understanding and state of federal special education laws, special education service plans, and communication between school systems and testing accommodation requirements. With the goal of identifying and resolving barriers of the program, we created a coalition with members of nonprofit organizations who serve disabled students. Department of Education, Homeschool Association, Non-Public School Administration, Indiana Council for Administrators of Special Education, and school choice policy organizations, some in the room today. So in conclusion, I would like to end with one of our students who has been educated at home since inception of the ESA program. Over the past year, she has recouped 2 years of math. Quote from Mom, "The ESA has been our education utopia. It's not a good thing, it's necessary. It allows her to move and have the social connection she just so desperately needs, respects the boundaries of her medical condition, and gives her a rich environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This time we'll call on Dr. Patrick Wolf.
Chair Buckley, Vice Chair Allen, distinguished committee members. My name is Patrick J. Wolf. I am a distinguished professor and hold the endowed chair in school choice in the Department of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas. I have been studying and evaluating private school choice programs for 25 years. Choice programs are successful when they accomplish three things. First, they need to attract a large and diverse set of high-quality education providers. Second, they must provide information to parents to help them act as informed consumers of education. Third, they should prioritize serving disadvantaged students while eventually offering school choice to all K-12 students. Participation in a choice program is voluntary for private providers of educational products and services. I urge policymakers to avoid including onerous regulations that drive away quality private schools. Research I have conducted with colleagues demonstrates conclusively that requiring open admissions and mandating the administration of the state accountability test leads many high-quality private schools to pass on participating in a choice program. Schools need to be able to apply their normal admission standards to students in school choice programs so they can be confident that admitted students are prepared to thrive in their school. Most private schools distinguish themselves by offering a curriculum that differs from the public schools. They do not want to administer a test that is closely aligned with the public school curriculum, as such a test would be a poor gauge of how much their students are learning. Second, as detailed in my co-authored book, The School Choice Journey, parents need meaningful and reliable information to guide their school choices. Most parents understand and respect the school accreditation process and view accreditation as a confirmation that a private school is prepared to provide a quality education to their child. I support school choice policies that require private schools to be accredited or to be in the process of becoming accredited, so long as an expansive set of accrediting agencies are eligible to provide that basic mark of quality. Parents also value test score information, so long as the test is a valid measure of student learning. I support the requirement that students participating in choice programs take a test annually that is selected by their private education provider, with individual student results reported to parents and aggregate school results reported publicly. Independent nonprofit and community organizations have important roles to play in supporting parents in a school choice program. Parents seek many details about the educational and extracurricular offerings of schools besides just test scores. They tend to place more trust in that information if it comes from an independent source than if it comes from a government bureaucracy. They also place a great deal of trust in the opinions and school ratings of other school choice parents. Some parents value access to a navigator to help coach them through the process of choosing a private school and customizing their child's education. And Colleen Dipple will be speaking later about the Navigator program she runs. The nonprofit sector delivers these services to parents in highly successful choice programs across the country. Finally, research shows that school choice is especially helpful to students from disadvantaged backgrounds. New school choice programs should prioritize eligibility to students with disabilities, children who are homeless or in foster care, and students from low-income families. After programs are up and running and serving these disadvantaged subgroups of students, all K-12 students in the state should be eligible to participate if their parents decide that a private school or customized education best serves the child's educational needs. Parents are the world's foremost experts on the needs of their children. When they are provided with more educational options, good things tend to follow. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Wolf. Now we'll move on to Michael Chartier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Michael Chartier, and I'm the Director of Education Choice Policy at Excel & Ed. ExcelinEd is a national nonprofit that supports state leaders in transforming education to unlock opportunity and lifelong success for each and every child. We are focused on educational quality, innovation, and opportunity both within and outside of the traditional education system. I'm here today to discuss our role in education choice across the country and the lessons we have learned about ESA policy and ESA implementation. Education scholarship accounts, or ESAs, are flexible spending accounts funded by the state and controlled by parents. With an ESA, parents can customize and direct funds to a combination of approved uses, such as tutoring, therapy for students with disabilities, instructional materials and curriculum, online programs, private school tuition, contracted services with school districts, exam fees, and savings for future education expenses, among other things. ESAs pave the way for parents to either fund their child's education through a private provider or fully customize their child's education by choosing a variety of vendors. We have developed a series of policies that we believe benefit all parties by balancing family flexibility, fiscal accountability, and ease of program administration. First, and perhaps most important, we believe that every student in the state should be eligible to participate. Students should receive the same amount of funding they would receive in a public school, including any extra dollars they might receive for learning difficulties or other special circumstances. Parents should be able to spend their money on a wide variety of education options. We want to see the state lay out broad categories of spending that are allowed, but also allow flexibility within those categories. What might not make sense to one person could make complete sense to another. A state may decide to outsource program management to a vendor to handle applications or payment processing. We support that. If a state determines that a test is required for accountability, the state should let the provider determine which of the many norm reference tests are aligned with their curriculum. Most providers want to show their value, but they want to take a test that reflects what and how they teach. Parents are choosing these providers because they are different than what they currently have, and that diversity should be protected. We know from surveys and parent-provider experience that providers will choose not to participate in the program if they will have to change their admissions, teacher hiring, or content and practices. Lastly, an annual report can tell a great deal about program success, such as who is using it, what kind of expenses parents are spending their money on, and how fast programs are growing. These policy building blocks will set an ESA program up for success. But I also want to talk about how programs can be implemented successfully after they are passed. ExcelinEd has been working in the ESA implementation space for the past 4 years and convenes state ESA leaders multiple times per year to share best practices and learn from each other. We have learned that states should set aside a reasonable share of funds to administer the program. While there is no magic number for administration, a percentage between 5% and 10% would work for most programs. Additionally, programs will cost more in the beginning, so extra capital could be allocated then, and the percentage lowered as the program matures and efficiencies can be leveraged. We should provide a broad time frame in which families can sign up to receive an ESA. This helps promote fair access and healthy participation. Ideally, the opportunity to apply should be year-round to accommodate various parent decisions. We should ensure parents only have to apply to the program once. Requiring families to reapply every year only adds frustration and is a burden for both the parent and the administrator. Instead, we should ask parents to make a brief annual acknowledgement that they wish to continue to participate in the program. Administrators should be authorized to implement a targeted system of expenditure auditing. Review of every single expenditure can slow down the process, which causes parents weeks or even months of frustration. ESA administrators instead can authorize targeted sample auditing. This draws from established standards in other fields and can even incorporate artificial intelligence technologies. Depending on state-specific ESA statutes, families may make purchases from approved schools and other providers through an online marketplace or through reimbursement of private purchases, even though that may stretch administrative capacity. The reimbursement approach gives families a convenient option to secure goods and services, while the online marketplace, when done well, provides a level playing field that is transparent and user-friendly. Laws should not unnecessarily restrict purchases to either of these two options. As I mentioned before, we launched our ESA Administrative Network in 2020. We currently have 19 states represented across both ESA and microgrant programs. We gather in person twice a year and a few other times virtually to tackle problems and learn about what is working in other states. We welcome any new administrators to the network so they can hear directly from their peers. No state will be going through this alone. In closing, thank you for allowing me to share a little through our thoughts on ESA implementation. This is an intense process with lots of different policy considerations, from eligibility to accountability. But we believe that any program should center students and families. From having an easy one-time application for all Texas students to allowing a wide variety of education expenses to be approved, students are the ultimate customer for these programs. Policymakers will never go wrong by putting them first. And lastly, you will not be going through this process alone. Thank you.
All right, thank you. This time we'll hear from Robin Bagley.
Chairman Buckley, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today to share information about the implementation of Utah's Universal ESA program. My name is Robin Bagley. I'm the Executive Director for the Utah nonprofit advocacy organization, Utah Education Fits All. We were involved in the initial passage of the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program and serve as the watchdog and advocacy group for the parents and for the law. I'm happy to share our Utah story and our experiences with you as you contemplate enacting a similar school choice policy to serve the education needs of Texas families. We recognize that each state is vastly different, and so I'm not here to instruct you, but rather to support and provide you with useful information. In January of 2023, the Utah legislature passed one of the most empowering ESA laws in the nation, the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program. In doing so, Utah joined a handful of states offering universal school choice to families for children grades K through 12. That number continues to increase across the nation, demonstrating the rising power of parental choice and agency in education. The Utah law awards $8,000 scholarships, regardless of income level or demographic variables, to families to use for expenses for the education of the student. Such financial support is a game changer. It has significantly democratized access to diverse educational settings, allowing parents to customize options that better align with their values, their expectations, and their children's unique needs. Families can choose to use their scholarships for private school, micro schools, homeschooling, or various combinations. Additionally, we allow public schools to participate as providers in the program. Funds become available beginning July 1 of each year and must be used by June 30th. Any remaining scholarship dollars are not carried over but are redeposited into the overall scholarship fund. Our ESA program is funded through an ongoing line item appropriation that must go through a legislative process in order to be increased. There is no automatic growth formula or escalation clause within the law. However, the individual scholarship amount itself is set to rise in conjunction with the CPI. The original bill appropriated $40 million in scholarship funding to serve 5,000 students. In the subsequent 2024 legislative session, prior to the program's first year of operation, funding was doubled to $80 million to accommodate 10,000 students. Due to the limitation in funding, Utah placed into law income preference levels and a lottery selection. There are 3 established income levels. The first is 200% of federal poverty level or less. That's $62,400 for a family of 4. The second is 200 to 555% of poverty level. The highest amount on that end would be $173,160 for a family of 4. And then the third level is any income level above 555%. An application period is established in which families may apply. Selection is not determined on a first-come, first-served basis within that window. At the close of the application period, a lottery is conducted within each income category that has filled. Those in the lowest income preference level are considered first. If applicants in that level are higher than the number of available scholarships, selection is by lottery. If lower, all within the category are awarded, and selection moves on to the next income level preference. The process repeats through the income levels until all scholarships are awarded. Siblings are awarded together. Families apply with one application that includes all children. The process for waitlisted students follows the same income preference levels. Numbers are allotted by income category. Students awarded the scholarships will remain in the program if they select to renew, while the application process for new students is reset and waitlisted students must begin the process over again. The 2024-25 school year is the first year of operation for our program. Our application portal opened on February 28th, shortly after funding was doubled to serve 10,000 students. 10,617 applications were completed within the first 24 hours. Applications were received in every corner of our state across most zip codes, including rural, urban, and suburban. When the portal closed on April 22nd, a total of 27,270 student applications had been received. This means that nearly 2/3, or 17,000 hopeful students, were waitlisted. When scholarship awards were initially announced, all recipients were reported as qualifying in the lowest income level preference of 200% of federal poverty level or less, a fairly remarkable outcome. Since that time, we are aware there have been some income preference level 2 students awarded the scholarship through the waitlist process. However, the program manager has not released those numbers. Limitations in funding present the most obvious barriers to offering universal school choice to families. While the Utah Fits-All law is touted as universal, with restricted funding, it has not yet reached that promise or potential. I've actually used up my time, but I have just a few quick things that are touch points that policymakers may grapple with. Starting with funding, when the number of scholarships are limited, the policy must identify how to handle awards and prioritization. I've already shared Utah's process with you. Demographic categories lead to a more complicated application process depending on the information and proof required, and fidelity to the process can become a challenge. Allowable expenses are by far the most hotly debated policy topics within the movement of school choice. The arguments range from providing full autonomy and freedom to the parent to placing very prescriptive restrictions and limitations within the law. A swing in either direction presents its own set of challenges. Too restrictive and you don't recognize the agency of parents in their children's education. Too liberal and you face the political backlash of appearances and controversy that potentially place the law in jeopardy. Utah's law is by far one of the most permissive in recognizing and favoring the parents' ability and freedom to actively shape their children's learning journey, but this has rendered implementation challenges in terms of program manager or administrative responsibilities, especially in terms of identifying and categorizing approved and prohibited expenses. The administrative challenges increase if the expectation is to have eyes on all expenses. It is realistically not sustainable as the program grows. And then finally, accountability is one last issue that I wanted to address as it relates to the Utah experience. Ours is somewhat unique. Utah has a law that allows all parents to opt out their children from public school state assessments. Because of this, a different approach was taken to address the pressing concerns over scholarship accountability. In order to maintain eligibility for the scholarship year after year, students must choose between one of 2 options. The first is proof of assessment. Assessment options are outlined in the law. They include standards-based, high school, college readiness, nationally norm referenced, among others, and made available by the program manager at the parent's request. This can include qualifying assessments taken at a student's private school. The second is a portfolio. This must be completed and submitted annually to the program manager, either by the student or the student's parent. The content of the portfolio needs to include a description of the student's educational opportunities and achievements under the program for the given year. The portfolio can be as simple or as extensive as the recipient chooses, and the content may not be disclosed except to the parent. So as I close my testimony and open up to some questions, I'd like to end with just these thoughts. While the challenge of navigating through significant parent choice policies is a difficult one, both legislatively and politically, it represents the future of education. We exist in an ever-changing world where we have the ability to customize nearly everything in our lives. This shift to an ESA-style approach is a harbinger of a more dynamic, responsive, and inclusive educational landscape, where the needs and choices of families take center stage. The burgeoning popularity of ESA programs is not just about the numbers, rather about recognizing and celebrating the agency of parents in their children's education and their growing inclination to explore and embrace alternative educational pathways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, we'll have Colleen Dipple.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Buckley, for inviting me to speak to this committee, and thank you to each of you for your interest in this issue. I'm Colleen Dipple, the co-founder and CEO of Families Empowered. I'm a former Texas public school teacher. I have a master's degree in ed leadership, and most importantly, I'm a mother of 2 children. 15 years ago, I co-founded Families Empowered to help parents find schools that will best serve their children. Today, we've served over 105,000 families in Texas. Families Empowered provides free, bilingual, personalized school navigation services to families looking for educational option. Our vision is that all families will have access to schools that work for them. Parents are at the center of everything we do. They are our core customers. 89% of our families identify as people of color, and 59% are living on $50,000 a year or less. We know, after working with them, that choosing a school is a personal decision. It's emotional, and it is high stakes. We've built a parent service model that provides tailored, unbiased information about all school options to parents without judgment of their personal choices. Neutrality is at the core of our service, and we believe it is critical for parent navigators to provide sector-neutral guidance as they serve families. We partner with schools that want to enroll parents. We've partnered with 14,255 schools in Texas. That includes HISD, Austin ISD, Fort Worth ISD, San Antonio ISD, charter schools, both CMOs and one-off sort of mom and pop charters, private schools, religious and secular, and on occasion, we have referred folks to the Texas Homeschool Coalition. We provide parents with accurate and actionable information in a format that works for them. We tailor our communications and services to meet the diverse needs of our parents. We have found that parents want and need more than a posting on a school finder website. We serve parents through text, email, digital, and in-person events, and we run the only free bilingual K-12 call center in the state of Texas, and I think in the United States, focused on helping families find and apply to schools that meet their child's need. Last year alone, we made over 80,000 phone calls in Texas to parents. We sent over 680,000 emails. We have a social media reach of 2 million people, and we've hosted over 18,000 parents in live in-person events across this state. Demand for school options in Texas is very high. The number of children on Texas charter waitlists grew to 10,000 students last year, to a total of 76,000 today. That's the largest one-year increase on record. We serve these parents every day, and in fact, 3 weeks ago, 600 parents RSVP'd for a school fair that we hosted in San Antonio, and 2 weeks ago, 150 parents attended a pre-K event that we hosted in Fort Worth. The school fairs that we host, they help parents talk directly with educators in their local school, in their community, to see if the school is a right fit for them. And at these events, in a single day, a parent can visit directly with several schools, which provides them with unprecedented access to educational options. The low-income families we serve, in which both parents often work 2 or 3 shift jobs, do not often have the benefit of time and the knowledge of all the options available in their community. We provide them with access at no cost. We have done this for 15 years because we believe that every family should be empowered to select the best fit school for their child. The polls are accurate. Parents want school options. Our work illuminates the fact that parents benefit from support as they navigate the different choices available to them. And we believe that they deserve support. Parents who utilize our services feel that they are stuck in schools that do not work best for their children, or they are new parents looking for schools for the first time. Not only are we meeting the needs of families in Texas, but we have helped incubate 2 parent navigation organizations for families participating in ESA programs in Florida and Arizona. Our experience has taught us that choosing a school for your child is an act of love for a parent. But it is high stakes, and it's not a decision that parents make often. It requires trade-offs. Families are perfectly capable of making these choices, but they understand the gravity of their decisions, and they want to make the right choice for their son, their daughter, their grandchild. And this requires person-to-person conversations. We're in an unprecedented time in Texas as a legislator will have the opportunity once again to craft policy that will empower Texas parents with more school choices. As you all consider the components that should be in place to ensure that those who would benefit the most have access to this program, I urge you to consider the support that will be provided to families as they utilize the new tool that they will now have in their toolbox. The policy you craft and ultimately pass will be very consequential to parents, and I really appreciate the time that you are taking to get this right.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, we'll start with questions now. Representative Hinojosa.
I'm not sure I have so much a question as a statement. We just heard a whole panel on an expenditure of public dollars that if we did it in Texas, we'd be looking at over $1 billion program. And we heard no data cited, which is interesting to me because I guess we're just abandoning making data informed or data driven decisions when it comes to taxpayer dollars in this amount if it's privatized. And that I think is really disappointing considering, again, how substantially underfunded our neighborhood public schools are and how we seem to not care about what parents want in our neighborhood public schools, and that is to fund our schools, the only option that is available to all kids. The only idea I heard here that I would like to explore is the Vermont law that allows for parents to opt out of standardized testing. I would like to explore that option for our parents because they absolutely deserve their voices to be respected. Parents and teachers, we don't listen enough to those voices when it comes to our neighborhood public schools. We also heard from the expert that is on the panel that these options only work when private schools are allowed to discriminate in admissions. Well, wait a second. Then how can we say this is a good option for our Texas public schools kids? These are public dollars. They should not be used to discriminate. If you can only get results for kids by discriminating who you're going to admit, that's not an option I think we should put our taxpayer dollars behind. Thank you.
Yeah. Could we maybe speak, Dr. Wolf, to some of the, talk about data. Let's talk about some data and who enrolls, who chooses these programs and what that looks like in your research and experience over many, many years.
Sure. When new private school choice programs are launched, typically about 4 to 8% of the eligible population applies in the first couple of years. So there isn't like a mass stampede out of public schools. It's basically the children for whom the public school placement is not working. They're the ones whose parents go to the trouble of enrolling them in these programs and the disruption of switching schools because it's so important for them to get their children in a school environment that's going to work for them. Private school choice programs are especially popular among disadvantaged subpopulations. So African American families disproportionately participate in private school choice programs. For example, they're also very popular among families of children with disabilities. So if you look at all of the programs, all 72 programs across 34 states in the United States, 14% of the private school choice enrollments are in programs that are limited to children with disabilities. So that's a higher proportion than the proportion of children with disabilities in district-run public schools. So those two groups, private school choice is very popular for them.
I believe that we've talked about that in the programs that you've highlighted today that participation is limited by the appropriation. So there's been some certain appropriated in most states, and then that sort of drives the uptake. You mentioned the percentage of parents that apply over the first couple of years. What is the percentage, Mr. Chartier, maybe you could speak to Florida, after 20, well, I know it's varied, but after probably 20 years of a parental choice program, what's the percentage uptake or percentage of kids participating in those scholarships?
Those programs grow by single-digit percentages each year. Over the total time in the program, I don't have that number in front of me about what the total percentages because Florida just combined all of their programs together this past legislative session. I don't have that in front of me, but I'd be happy to find that for you. But generally speaking, these programs grow slowly over time. We've seen that in Indiana. We've seen that in Florida. As Dr. Wolf said, in Arkansas, those numbers grew 1-2 percentage points each year. So these programs do grow small over time as parents learn about them. But I'm happy to get you the overall Florida percentage numbers when I get off this panel.
Okay, thank you very much. Chairman Dutton.
Thank you. How do children benefit?
Do you want to take yeah.
Exponentially. So I shared one quote from a parent that said over the last 2 years, her daughter has recouped 2 years in learning loss in math. We have more of that statistical data. Again, we have a $10 million appropriation. We're going to be right around 1,000 students. So smaller subset. We do have one of the most robust voucher programs in the state. But we also do require state assessments. And so we have that data as well that our Department of Education tracks on an annually basis to be able to show their growth rate as well. So I'm definitely happy to share that information. But we're customer service. We are on the phone with these parents. We're meeting these parents in their school systems. We're meeting them at their ABA centers and saying that this works. It's an investment. We do have educate at home students that are involved as well. 30% of our population educate at home, where they want that hybrid. They want to be able to go to a therapy center because they think that's best for them, and then they also want to be able to a la carte a class here and there to be able to increase our educational environment.
So have you done a survey with students?
Yes.
And what did the
Parents,
students
providers.
say?
Yes, that is part of our legislation.
What does the students say about the program?
So from the student standpoint, again, we're K through 12, and so I'm not talking to a 5-year-old respectfully. I was like, from a parent perspective, 80% says they have seen growth in their child because of ESA, and
Yeah,
we're
that's
in
what
year
the
2.
parents say. I'm
Yes.
asking you, what do the students say?
We do not survey students
You don't ask
specifically.
them at
No,
all.
we do not.
Let me ask this then. Have you seen an increase in the number of private schools?
Yes, so we actually have a 400% increase of private schools in 1 year.
Of 400%?
Yes.
So you started with what number?
12 schools year 1. We are at 91 schools year 2. Total providers, 698 providers across the state of Indiana.
And do they locate generally in the same area or?
No, rural, metro. We also have schools that are outside of state as well that are considered businesses. So Kentucky and Chicago, we have students that do participate in specific schools for disability.
Do you all have in your constitution a prohibition against using a public funds for a private purpose?
Unknown. I would have to get back to you on that.
You don't have that?
So I'm a Hoosier as well. We have a state, what's known as a Blaine Amendment, that kind of speaks to what you said. So we had a court case back in 2012. It was named Meredith v. Pence in the state of Indiana. And what that found was that the state of Indiana gives private dollars to parents, and through their impartial decisions about what the parents want to do with those education dollars, they can freely choose a private religious school if they wanted to. That broke, in Indiana's mind, that prohibition between the state funding religious schools. That parent decision is what broke that connection. So that was the general outcome of decision in Meredith v. Pence.
So there was a case that stood for the proposition that you could use public funds for this private purpose?
Yes, you could use it. Yes, so our program in not the education savings account, but the voucher program is formula funded. It's funded through our education formula. And again, that parent decision, the money's coming to the hands of the parent, and then that parent decision is what breaks that chain between state funding and religious education.
I'm trying to understand that. So the parent decision, so you give the parents the money.
Exactly.
And does that money to what extent does that pay for the entire cost of private school?
That would depend on the school. I know that there have been some studies done specifically in Indiana. I know that they've been done in other states that look at what percentage of tuition that covers. I know that the median tuition price in the state of Indiana is lower than the average voucher amount for Indiana. I can't speak for what it is for the ESA program. I'd be happy to get you more of that data. I couldn't cite you the exact percentage, but I know that the median private school tuition in Indiana is lower than the voucher amount.
It's lower?
So
than
the
amount?
voucher would cover the cost of tuition.
So private schools are charging less than what you generally appropriate to public schools?
Private schools, yes, they charge less than what we appropriate. So in Indiana, we only get 90% of what the that student would get in private school. They don't get access to any of the federal funds or any of the access to the local funds. It's only 90% of the state per pupil allotment.
And can you describe the students who have chosen to do this?
They come from all backgrounds, all across the state. Each year, the state of Indiana does put out a report. I'd be happy to pull that for you and give you some of the highlights of, how many low-income students, breakdown in demographics. I don't have that right in front of me, but we do a report every year that talks about the voucher program. Do you have any of the ESA numbers?
ESA specifically, well, even to the voucher program, there's 122,000 non-public students in the state. Last year, 68,982 were funded through the voucher program.
And how many of those were going to private schools before you started the voucher program?
Those were enrolled. So you have to be enrolled in a private school to be qualified for the voucher program. So completely different from ESA.
But my question is, how many of your students were availing themselves of private schools before you implemented the voucher program?
So Indiana's, when the voucher program was started, it was only for switchers. You had to be in the public school first. You couldn't have current private school students receive a voucher. That number was around 60,000. I think between 60 and 65,000 students were switchers from the public schools to a private school. I don't know what that number is today because we did expand the voucher program to include current private school students last legislative session. But at least I can tell you that around 60,000 students were switchers and were not currently in private schools.
So you had to be in a
public school. You had to be in a public school
public
first.
School
to be a
for how
switcher.
long?
I think it was 2 semesters. I believe it was 2 semesters.
A year.
You had to be
School year.
School year.
One school year. So did you have any students switching to school years, switching back from private school to public schools?
I don't have any data on that off the top of my head. I don't know, but I don't know.
Does anybody know that? Do you know that?
I do not. I can get the Department of Education in Indiana administers the voucher program, and I can forward you their public report.
Okay, and what private schools were charging, has that been affected at all by your programs?
I can tell you that in Utah, they can't charge different admission or tuition. So their published tuition for all students, whether they receive a scholarship or not, has to remain the same. You cannot charge a different tuition.
Has it gone up, though? Has it
Well, our
increased, or has
program
it
is
gone
pretty
down?
young, so no, not at all. But we're in our first year of the program.
And how many students do you have in your program?
So 10,000, and to go back to what you asked earlier, all 10,000 qualify in the lowest income preference, which is 200% of poverty or less. All 10,000 recipients.
And are the private schools required to take any student who accesses the voucher?
So private schools can't discriminate according to federal guidelines, but beyond that, they have their own admission guidelines.
So they can, is the answer.
Theoretically, yes. No one has at this point, but theoretically.
They could choose not to take a student, even though they had a voucher.
Yes, but they can't discriminate. They're still held to the same federal laws on discrimination of children for religion and other purposes. So,
Yeah, that works pretty well in the general society too. Let me ask this way. I'm trying to get around what should we expect as policy makers for the voucher program to do for Texans? And I mean children especially.
Sure. So, there have been a number of studies of the effects of private school choice programs on student outcomes.
Yeah.
The most rigorous ones apply experimental methodology. They're called the gold standard of evaluation. There have been 18 gold standard evaluations of the test score effects of private school choice programs. 11 of them report positive effects. 5 of them report no gains or losses, and only 2 report negative effects, or both evaluations of the Louisiana Scholarship Program, and I authored one of those. And the Louisiana Scholarship Program was a heavy regulation school voucher program, and that model is not being used. In terms of new program enactments, people are gravitating toward programs that are different from the Louisiana Scholarship Program because that is a cautionary tale. In terms of educational attainment, which is how far children go in school, measured by high school graduation, college enrollment, and college completion, that's where the results are especially consistent, favoring these private school choice programs. There are 18 findings about the effects of private school choice on educational attainment, and 16 of them report positive effects, and 2 of them report no effects either way. So it looks like these programs are especially effective at keeping children engaged in the educational project longer. They stay with their education longer, they go farther in their education. That's the main effect of private school choice on student
Tell me
outcomes.
what that means. You mean they go to college?
Yeah, they're more likely to graduate from high school, enroll in college, and complete college if they participate in one of these programs.
Well, then that raises another question. Are there specific grades more affected by your program?
We haven't studied the effects on grades because grades are rather subjective. They're
No,
given,
I mean grade levels. I'm sorry.
Oh, are there different?
7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, or 3rd grade, or whatever?
There isn't a consistent pattern of effects by grade level that we've seen.
So you would expect, if we looked at your program, you would have essentially the same number throughout every grade level.
Oh, in terms of enrollment, yes, Representative, there is a strong preference among families to enroll their children in these programs in the earlier grades. So a K-12 private school choice program is going to have a lot of enrollments in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade, many fewer enrollments in the high school grades, except for 9th grade, which is a transition grade anyway.
And that's sort of what I was getting at earlier about whether the students are making the choices or parents are making the choices. Because generally, children in the lower grades don't get to make choices. And the only time that starts to happen is as students get older, and so you would find, I was just guessing, but I was guessing that you would find fewer students in the upper grades accessing the private school voucher.
That's correct, Representative.
And so that essentially says, I guess, what you all are saying, that this is a program that benefits parents before it starts to benefit students.
So I might just jump in and say, as someone who's just been in the parent service sector for 15 years, parents are the custodial caregivers for their children. They make health decisions, nutrition decisions, education decisions, and so, you're right. I mean, at the sort of lower grades, parents are required to make those decisions, right? We don't let 5-year-olds sort of make lots of decisions for themselves. anecdotally, if you were to come to any of our events, we host actually we have hosted events at the zoo in Houston and at the Minute Maid Park. We'd love to have you come. High school students will come to those because the high school student is participatory as a parent yourself, right? So there is this selection even within our magnet schools. Our magnet schools have kind of test in, there are performing arts schools, there are STEM schools, there are lots of these schools that, kids start to have these interests. They also our magnet schools are test-in schools, so there are cut scores, and those are selective as well. So I think you're right. Yes, parents, but I would say families benefit because when children are in schools that work for them, and the parents have to make these, very consequential decisions, they benefit, but they're making those decisions not for themselves, right? They're making them for their children.
At least that's what they say. And finally, Mr. Chairman, if I may, what has been the impact on public schools?
Representative, there have been 31 rigorous evaluations of the effect that the launch or expansion of private school choice programs has on the performance of affected public schools. And 27 of them report that the effect is positive in terms of student outcomes. So the test scores of students who remain in a public school when that school is pressured by competition from private school choice, those test scores have gone up in 27 out of 31 evaluations. So it's one of the points of great consensus in the field of school choice research, and that is that through the process of competitive pressure, private school choice generates a rising tide that lifts all boats.
Well, I guess I sort of having a conflict in my mind because when you say that, but you also say on the other hand that it's generally in the lower grades. I'm wondering how that doesn't seem to compute to me.
Can I
Yes, ma'am.
I actually think your question is a really good one.
I do too.
And we're in alignment on that. That's great. I'd urge you, again, you all are crafting the policy. I'd urge you to consider allowing ISDs to participate, right? So there are schools, so as I said, we've incubated 2 new organizations, one in Arizona and one in Florida, to really sort of solve this challenge around parents utilizing this good matching, great, sort of fit. And what is fascinating is in some places, public schools, this gets to your question of the upper school, they can utilize an ESA to say boost enrollment so if you're able to participate in a chemistry class and I'm homeschooling, right? Or I really want my child to take physics. Why not take physics from an ISD? They're probably pretty good at it. Why wouldn't we be more creative and to think about allowing districts to participate? That is, again, you all are crafting policy if it passes, if this comes before you, I would urge you to consider that.
And that's something that Utah has done. So public schools can be providers in the program, and some of our largest districts in the very first year have already signed on. And again, we have a lot of homeschoolers in the program who are very excited about this. They like to do dual enrollment, so.
Should we have compulsory school attendance?
Pardon?
Should we have compulsory school attendance
For
children?
Well, we do have compulsory school education.
I said, should we have
attendance
that
in
though? Should that be the case, or should we let parents decide if their children ought to go to school?
I can't speak to that. I only can speak from Utah's experience, not what maybe you should consider.
Well, that's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm asking. And the reason I'm asking is because you all rely so much on parents making decisions for their children, and I'm wondering where does the limits to that go?
As long as they're a minor, that's how it works.
Representative, to your point, we do trust parents. We know that in a variety of states, parents can homeschool their students, and we are fully supportive of that. In fact, we encourage that. So as long as parents, meet the requirements that are set out in state law for education, we support whatever that looks like.
So we don't really need compulsory school attendance
I
since
mean,
parents are making that choice.
So, Representative, I think to your point, however that looks, whatever that compulsion looks like, whether it goes to a public school, a private school, or homeschool, that is what we support. Where that education happens to us, we're agnostic to.
Or no school.
So, I mean, if that looks like a homeschool representative, to me, that's okay.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Just to follow up, you mentioned going from 12 to 90 private schools. That doesn't mean new schools that started up, that someone built, or does it mean
Correct.
private schools already there that chose to participate? Because I am totally shocked by that number.
Yes, that is correct. I was like, chose
So-
to participate. So in Indiana law, it's an opt-in, not an opt-out. Same with the voucher program. The voucher program has 353 non-public schools that participate to accept voucher funds. In ESA, we have 91 currently.
And so because definitions matter, just so we all understand, a voucher program is really between the state and the private school, right? So many times a parent might not even know that a private school is applying for that on their behalf. Is that correct?
So the non-public school is an intermediary that actually got placed into law as well to apply on behalf. But the parents are still giving tax information, they're still giving all the documentation, and then the school submits that on behalf of the parent.
I guess, man, I'm not as good at asking questions as he is. But what I'm getting at is the payment is made directly from the state to the school.
Yes.
Where in an ESA, whether it be a spending account or a savings account, which are different, you would have those dollars sort of being held on behalf of a parent and then paid on their behalf for whatever tuition, service, therapy, what have you they needed. Is that correct? And y'all have both.
Yes.
So you have a voucher program that's been around quite a while.
13 years, yes.
And then you have an ESA program that's been around a shorter amount of time.
Yes.
Okay, so language matters, and so and definitions matter. So I just want to make sure that I understand what we're talking about. And what about accreditation? These 91 private schools, are they accredited?
No. Not for ESA. So voucher program, yes, they do have to be state accredited. For ESA, they can be non-accredited, third-party recognized by our Board of Education. Micro schools, they operate as a business and not a qualified school. Very clear in language.
Okay, all right. Yeah, Ms. Short here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add clarity to your question of the money going directly to a private school. I want to clarify, the money goes through the parent. It never goes
In
into
what?
their bank
In which
account.
one are we talking about?
The voucher
Yeah,
program.
okay.
So the money would go from the state to the parent. They can't deposit the money in their checking account or anything like that. And then that money is endorsed over to the school on behalf of the parent. So I want to be clear, because this was clear in the case I mentioned, Meredith v. Pence. The money does not go from the state to the private school. It goes to the parent to be endorsed over to the private school. But again, I want to be clear, the money can't go into their account. They can't take the money and do anything else with it. Okay. It can only be used for that purpose, to be endorsed over to the private school.
Okay. Chairman Longoria.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, so you mentioned money, and that's what I want to talk about. If this were to pass, voucher, how much money do you recommend the state allocate for vouchers?
For me?
Well, you guys are the experts, so we're trying to.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure you're asking me and the rest of the panelists. So for us, we advocate for education savings accounts here at Excel and Ed. Vouchers
Well,
are good
for the vouchers. Can anyone give a number on the voucher, on a recommendation?
I mean,
Anyone from the panel?
I can speak on behalf of Indiana Department of Education's going to get me. So 68,000 and some change students last year. That'll give you a perspective of what we're talking about. It was $472 million.
So what was the amount per child?
It averaged 6,200.
6,200 per child?
Correct.
Okay.
Special education is paid outside of that too.
Okay, so
from
ask that one
APC
right.
funding
So
flow.
for a voucher, Indiana 6,200.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Texas could do it with 6,200?
I think that's up for you. I don't know your math.
Okay, no, well, I'm asking.
And so this year we have 6,500 per student for
Okay,
the
s-
voucher program specifically.
Okay, so just to clarify, Indiana 6,500 per voucher.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about the ESAs? How much per ESA per pupil?
In Indiana?
Well, wherever. I mean, what is the recommended amount?
I mean, for Excel Ed, we want every dollar to follow every student, whether that's state, federal, or local. I don't know the Texas numbers on that statewide, what the average is, but we want every dollar to follow every student. So in Indiana, I can tell you, that's about $13,000. We want all $13,000 to follow students into an education savings account.
So 13,000 on the ESA in Indiana.
That's what.
Okay, what about SPED, special education? What is the difference and how much is being funded for that?
So special education has 3 appropriation levels, $525, $2,970, and then if you have autism spectrum disorder or severe disability, it's nearly $12,000. So it's dependent on what your special education level is, and that gets allocated. That's how we get up to about $20,000 per student, but on average, right now we have about $16,000 per student if you combine all of our students that are in our application.
So the
today.
average, I guess, is 16,000 per SPED student?
Yes,
And what's the maximum a student could get?
$20,251.
Okay. What about transportation? Is there a transportation allotment, or is all that money included in those, in the ESA or the voucher?
Transportation, but it's included in that amount. So you have up to $20,000, and then we have eligible expense categories. We do have a restriction for transportation to and from service providers only, up to $750, with the option to do a waiver. And we do have about 50% of our students do a waiver, so a second $750 that's
Okay,
allocated.
just go back. Explain
Yep.
that again. I'm a little bit confused.
So transportation, we have a carve out, but you have to use your $20,000 or whatever's allocated. It's not an additional pot of money. So $750 is what the parent can spend out of their ESA account. It's only to and from their service providers. So very specific. And then we do have an option for a waiver, and about 50% of our families do a waiver to say, I'm traveling more, I need to go to my service provider more, I need more tutoring, I need more ABA. So they're eligible for a waiver for a second $750. So max out that $1,500. But again, it has to be under their maximum amount for that was qualified for a year.
Okay, and that's for SPED, and I'm assuming regular, same thing? The 750?
$750. That's what has worked well in other states. $750 is what transportation is in other states for ESA. Capped expenses.
So I think as policymakers, you want to make sure we educate our children, right? That's the key. So our business is education, but how do we keep the business out of the business of educating? We want to run the business out, right? We don't want to make it a business. What do you propose? What parameters do you think we should set as policymakers to avoid keeping making business of the business of education?
I apologize. I don't think I understand the question. What
Well,
are you
I mean,
trying to
the thing is I feel like we need to educate our youth, right? And that is our business, right? That make sure we get folks educated. But now you see all these private industries coming in, and how do we make it so that they're not incentivized as profits over pupils? I mean, what do we do?
I'm going to jump in here. So I would say that comes down to eligible expenses. What are you requiring families to do? Ours are all or, which was some big consternation when it got passed in 21. So, everything STEM related or what's in their special education service plan. So parents are required to spend all that. And then Indiana, we require the state assessment. So that's where you can build parameters in of here are the guardrails. Let us administrators deal with the administration. Let us, use technology to be able to help the parents so it's not a barrier, it's access to service of education.
Okay, so I'm sure you've probably seen some abuse and fraud in this, right? Where have you seen it?
So I'll talk specifically. So career scholarship account, I got asked to buy 3 cars. No, I'm going to say no on that. But we do see it. I was like, and being able to say, you know, curriculum or supplementary items. So a lot of our parents specifically want sensory items. That's not curriculum. So we say no. Again, Indiana only serves special education students. And so we're very clear and restrictive, and my staff looks at every single invoice and eligible expense. We can do that because we're small. I was like, you look at Arizona, you look at Florida. I was like, that's probably a bigger conversation, and maybe Utah. Really drive what they need for their education. So we let technology work for us. We built a $2.8 million infrastructure with our first vendor. Respectfully, our appropriation was $3 million. Came in Treasurer Elliott by trade. He's a software engineer, and I said, this is really restrictive to the parents and the providers utilizing this program. Yes, that money was already spent, but I built a program for ESA and CSA on $200,000 with a new vendor. So it makes it easier. We can look at tax information. We can look at special education. We have statuses that go out to the parents, that go out to the providers. Every time we approve a provider and review a provider, it pings on the parents. This one's able to be spent with. Use your ESA money, and this is how. So making that infrastructure easier and simplistic for the parents, we brought in parent groups, we brought in provider groups and said, you tell us what you need, and we built it for that. We also have translation service, 302 languages. In the state of Indiana, we don't even represent that many languages, but we have it available. Mobile and apps, I would say that is key to be able to utilize that as well and being able to bring that to the forward. We serve it at our families, 80% of our families use their mobile device. These parents are on the run. They're the most passionate parents serving special education kids. They don't have the time to try to figure out a system and figure out administration of this program. They need it to work for them. And essentially, they just need it to be a bank account with expenses that are very clear of what they can and can't spend with. And it's okay to say no. It's just easier to get to yes when you start seeing those trends.
Do you have any idea kind of what the state spent on all that?
So,
on implementing a software program and getting all these?
$2.8 million.
Do you know what they kind of spend to operate that
So it's a cost saving for us of $500,000 within our new program.
within the new program? But what are
Family.
they? I mean,
200. So we spent $200,000 with our current vendor. Previous vendor, it was $2.8 million.
okay.
You don't need to spend that. I can testify to that.
Well, I'm worried. I mean, it seems like it could be an added burden to the state implementing a program, cost, software. Folks have to run it from the back end. That could be additional cost to the state.
Ours is contracted out. The Utah State Board of Education contracts out to a third-party nonprofit provider, so they become the program manager and they completely administer the program. And they receive $2.5 million for doing that, currently serving 10,000 students.
So it's $2.5 million to operate the program for the year.
Yes.
And Representative, it's pretty standard in the choice programs across the country to allocate 5% of total program costs to administration. That tends to be the parameter that's most common.
And I would also just add, I think, there are well-intentioned for-profit vendors who will probably claim that, an algorithm or an AI matching tool can just kind of match people and make this a very sort of slick, automated school choosing experience. Our 15 years has taught us really that point of view is a little bit naive and falls short. And so, supporting the end user, right, who is the parent on behalf of that child, I think we would agree that having some form of like neutrality and really like customer service parent support from a non-for-profit is a valuable thing to consider as you're thinking about administration.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Allen.
Thank you. This is the first panel that, thank you. The first panel to come up, and you didn't have a handout, so if I asked some, I didn't see a handout from either one of you. And so that may make my questions rambling for each one. And so I'll go to the first question is, how do you measure success if you don't have tests? How do you determine, and not anecdotally, like I heard you say a parent came and she said her daughter had grown sufficient. That's one parent, and that's anecdotal. How do you measure success of the entire program?
So Indiana does require tests. So we use Indiana state assessments only. And so I Learn, I Read, I Am, SAT, PSAT, WIDA Access. So we do have that, and our students are required to complete those tests every single year
Okay, then
per eligible grade.
let's talk about the data. If it's disaggregated and you separate the kids that came in under the program from the kids that are in the regular program, what does that data look like?
So from coming from public school or homeschool space into the program,
Yes.
I don't believe we can compare that. And the reason I say that is because our homeschoolers aren't required to test until they become an ESA student. And so we wouldn't have a data set for 30% of our students because in the state of Indiana, there is no testing requirement for our
We don't
homeschool
have an idea of whether your program is working for these kids that are coming in. So that's what we're saying. You have your students compared to public schools,
So there's 1.2 million students in the state.
and now you're serving how many in your program of these students who came from public schools?
Well, it's not specific, just public school. Ours specifically, we're in public, now ESA funded and not in a public school.
Okay. Now let's go to the money. You said, I think I heard you say it, this makes a difference. The funding is what? Is it $5,000?
So that's our career scholarship account, and that's specific to 10th, 11th, 12th graders, universal students. So that's a separate program. Is that what you're asking for, Representative?
Yeah, that's what I wrote, 5,000. Mm-hmm.
I'm like ESA versus CSA. Just want to make sure I'm
You're telling
representing.
me when you're handling the money and you're giving it out, you say, the parents will say to you, I want to buy, I'll just make up something. I want to buy a bicycle so he could ride wherever. And you say, no, we don't furnish bicycles, okay? Is that how do you handle that?
Yes, that is correct. So we have a spending category guide that gets published and reviewed on an annual basis. We also, in partnership with the Department of Education, go back and forth as well, specifically for special education services aligned to our spending categories and eligibility.
So I send you an invoice for something that I really want to buy and that you approve of. Who pays for it, and what's the process of getting that paid for?
So we have
Since I don't handle the money in my bank account.
correct. We have a vendor that is our bank account essentially for the parents, and so Treasurer of State. Once we get an invoice and it says yes, it's eligible through our staff, we remit payment to this vendor, and then the vendor pays the provider.
They give a check to the provider to buy whatever they want to buy?
Correct, within 3 business days.
Okay,
It's
so
settled.
in other words, the money still goes through the parents' hands.
Yes, correct.
Okay, I like that program.
So-
I'm gonna get me.
Not the parent's bank account, though.
We put in law, and it's the same class wallet vendor, but
I
there are
know,
many
but
out
you
there.
said the invoice is submitted to you, and then the person who's handling the money sends it to the parent.
It doesn't touch the parent's hands. It's in the parent's name in a bank account, class wallet.
It's
I
in
was
a
like, the
digital
vendor.
wallet.
Yeah,
We actually
digital.
put that in our law that we had to use a digital wallet.
Okay, and then they can go make the purchase?
So yeah, they come through the program manager with either their receipt or they're using a direct pay provider that's already in there, and then the direct pay provider's bank account is linked inside the wallet system as well. So once it's authorized, the money moves from the scholarship account to pay the provider.
Okay.
Or if they're turning in a receipt and it's approved, it moves from their scholarship account, reimbursing them back because they paid out of pocket.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah, and
Transportation,
Representative, if I could just, I'll give you an idea of how the Arkansas ESA program is
Please,
working.
Please.
So a parent gets $6,800 in their digital wallet. That's 90% of the public school foundation aid amount. And they want to use the bulk of it to pay for tuition at a chosen private school that their child's attending. So they go to a website. It's a marketplace where pre-approved providers of education services, pre-approved by the state, all have accounts on that web page. And the parent arranges for the transfer of the tuition amount to that school. Then the parent says, well, I've got $1,400 left. My child doesn't have a functional computer. And so they see a computer, a laptop computer, inexpensive laptop computer on Expedia. And because educational technology and ways to access education through technology is a category pre-approved on their digital wallet, they can use their digital wallet to buy that computer for their child outside of the marketplace. So that gives them more choices. And then let's say they've got $75 left and their child is in high school and wants to study for the SAT. So they score high on the SAT and can go to college. So then the parent could buy an SAT prep book at Barnes & Noble out of pocket and then send the receipt and request a reimbursement from the program. So those are the 3 ways that parents can mobilize the resources they're given through this program. Most of them are going to spend most of it in the marketplace, directing it to pre-approved providers. Many of them will go beyond that and use the digital wallet to make purchases outside the marketplace, but only within approved categories that are programmed in that digital wallet. And then some of them, in special cases, will make purchases outside the digital wallet and request reimbursement.
Okay. One more question on transportation. Did I hear you say they had a transportation voucher for? Would you explain that to me again?
Yes, I was like, Indiana does, and we have them actually in both of our programs. ESA is probably the easier one to describe. So they have to be a service provider, so pre-approved vendor that the parent utilizes. It's up to $750 for ESA. where that's again out of their total amount, so it's not an additional grant that they can drop down those funds. And then that reimburses not the parent, but the provider that they're utilizing to get to and from their service provider. So we
mode of
don't do a mileage
transportation is that? What
reimbursement
mode of-
in ESA. Sorry.
What mode of transportation is that? Is that an Uber, a school bus, or a private bus, or a train? What is that?
So with our ESA, it's very restrictive. We have quite a few of our students that actually need ambulatory transportation. So they're utilizing an ambulance or a service provider that can transport someone in a hand or in a wheelchair to and from their providers. For our career scholarship account program, anything's in. So we have mileage reimbursement with a very detailed process that the parent and the career scholarship account employer has to autograph and sign off on. We do have Uber, Lyft, rideshare, taxis. We do also pay tolls because we do have a toll system within Indiana. And then I was like, yeah, you kind of name it on transportation. It's a lot more flexible in the career scholarship account program.
Do you have
Utah
a
has
limited-
that as well, so it's up to $750 that you can use, but it is for public transportation or ride share only. You cannot use it for reimbursement as a parent driving your car.
Do you have limit on mileage?
Mileage, no, it's just up to that dollar amount of $625 within the career scholarship account. It's like once that maxes out, it doesn't matter. And then we do state allocation, so 47 cents per mile instead of federal rate. We use the state rate on mileage reimbursement.
Okay, so a kid can come from one side of town to the other side of town.
And we do require maps, so no, you cannot go to McDonald's and pick up your lunch. You need to go to and from your either school or the employer where you're getting your work-based learning experience.
Thank you, that answers a few. I'll give somebody else a chance.
Representative Tallarico, and then we'll do Representative Cunningham after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome all of you. This is my third term. I don't think I've seen this many out-of-staters on a panel here in front of the committee, and so welcome. I do think it's curious that we didn't invite anyone from Arizona, where news just broke that they are facing a $1.4 billion budget shortfall because of their new voucher program, which ballooned in cost by 400% over original estimates. Also think it's interesting we don't have anyone from Louisiana, where studies showed that their voucher students saw learning losses in math that were more than twice as large as those caused during Hurricane Katrina. We don't have anyone from Ohio, where studies showed that those voucher students fell behind at levels almost double the levels that were caused by COVID-19. But since y'all are here, I do want to ask Ms. Katzel about Indiana. So is it true that there was a study by researchers at the University of Notre Dame that found Indiana students who used your voucher were not benefiting but instead falling behind academically?
I'm actually not aware of that, and we're very invested in Notre Dame and their research team to be able to find that. We actually have 23 students in the South Bend region, which would be impacted by that.
Yeah, the study that I'm looking at from the University of Notre Dame shows that they analyzed student-level longitudinal data from public and private schools taking the same statewide standard assessment. Voucher students experienced an average achievement loss of 0.15 standard deviations in mathematics during their first year of attending a private school compared with matched students who remained in public school. That loss persisted regardless of the length of time spent in private school. So you're not familiar with that study?
So, Representative, this actually makes a little bit more sense. I do not administer the voucher program.
Okay, so you
Completely
only administer
separate.
the ESA program?
Correct.
So but you're still not familiar with this voucher data?
Representative, I'm familiar with that study. They did not find any negative effects in reading achievement. It was limited to math. And that was not a gold standard experimental study because students weren't randomly assigned to the treatment and control group. So you have to interpret the effects of any non-gold standard study, with some caution.
Well, and the English language arts results in this study was not positive either. It was neutral. And actually, my next question was for you, Dr. Wolf, because you, in your testimony, said that this benefits students with disabilities. And now I know you're from Arkansas, but do you know how many Texas private schools out of 1,200 private schools offer special education services?
No, Representative, I don't know that number offhand.
It's 67 private schools out of about 1,200. You want to guess what the average tuition is at those 67 private schools that offer special education services?
I don't have that information.
It's $20,000 a year. I know we're talking about math. I know $20,000 is a lot more than $8,000, which is what the original voucher bill proposed. So, I mean, my concern is that all of you have been invited to sell us on vouchers, which I appreciate. That's your position and what all of you do for a living. But I'm very concerned that we're not getting a true picture from across the country from folks who may disagree with your assessment. You know, Dr. Wolf, I know we have researchers here in Texas at Texas universities who have looked at the same data and come to different conclusions. So I would urge next time we have this hearing to provide a more balanced approach, because this frankly feels more like an infomercial than a hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Cunningham.
Thank you, Chairman Buckley. Looking, Ms. Bagley, didn't have anything, but then you said something. I want to go back to you. We're talking about the income performance, the income level performance that you used, and I believe it was like some percentages. Can you give that to me again? It was in your opening statement, and I kind of missed it because I did catch.
Are you wondering what our income preference levels are?
I'm going there, but yes.
Okay.
So you gave me different levels, because I think right now, if I last heard you say that you were at like 200%, 10,000, and I guess you went from 40 million to 80 million.
Yes.
Okay. So what is the levels though? I know you're a young program, right?
For what is the level of what?
The performance levels. I mean, what are the required levels to get in? I mean, 200%. You gave me some other percentages.
So there are 3 levels,
Okay.
and it's by lottery. So it depends on how many students apply. It was 200% of poverty level or less,
Okay.
200 to 555%, and then above 555%. So in the first year, we have 10,000 students who are awarded the scholarship. They all fall in the 200% of poverty level or lower.
Okay.
There were 27,270 applications, but only 10,000 were awarded, all in that level.
And all was at the 200% level.
Yes.
Well, that's where I wanted to go. Thank you, Dr. Wolf. And Chairman, I got questions for everybody, so I'm just going to get through with all my questions, and then I can just sit back. Dr. Wolf, I believe Chairman Dutton already kind of asked the question. You answered it. I just want to make sure when we're talking about post-secondary, attainment. I think he talked about all the kids, but I think your statement was, under this program, kids go further. Okay.
That's correct.
And so, what about what if it's workforce related? Is that the same? Kids are doing better, going further?
Representative, we don't have any research on the effects of private school choice programs on workforce participation.
Okay. Well, all right. What about the best practices? What are some of the best practices that we can ensure transparency to parents?
So, as I stated in my testimony, I think it's important that parents receive information about how well they're doing from a test chosen by the private school provider and administered to their child. But parents often rely on other cues regarding how their child is doing in school. I ran a focus group with a colleague. We asked 40 parents, how do you assess how well your child is doing in school? And none of the 40 parents actually selected test scores as their main factor. They mentioned things like their attitude towards school, completion of homework, grades, and things like that. And they can rely on those signals about their child's success in school because they see their child every day. And so basically a child's success in school is fairly transparent to parents just from their interactions with their children.
Okay. Well, Dr. Wolf, what about the state?
Well, that's an area, Representative, where I think norm reference tests, reported scores reported to parents, and then in aggregate form reported to the state, provide information about how well students are doing in various schools.
Okay. Well, one last question, because I want to touch on rural, urban, and suburban. Those schools, how are they different by school choice?
So the early school choice programs were all in urban environments, but the second wave has really expanded school choice statewide, and we still find that private school choice programs are especially popular in urban areas, but they also can be successful in suburban and rural areas as well. Florida is a great example of how school choice can spread to rural counties. A study by Ron Mattis found that now, 23 years into the school choice experience for Florida, that the rural counties, the public schools in rural counties in Florida, have lost some market share to private schools. So they are educating a lower proportion of the K-12 students in their county, but their enrollments are up because more families have moved to rural communities in Florida. And one reason they've moved there is because they know they have access to school choice. So there's lots of evidence signaling that school choice is a quality of life issue for parents, and it's making rural communities more attractive to them.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wolf. You had mentioned something about testing, and I wanted to go to Miss, excuse me if I butcher your name, Katzel, because I thought I heard Dr. Allen asked about testing, and I thought that was like a negative answer. So I'm going to ask this question because Dr. Wolf kind of mentioned testing. What tests are required for participating students?
So-
Is there a test?
Yes, Representative. In Indiana, it's specific to the Indiana statewide assessment. And so we are very specific to the tests that are provided to our accredited private schools and then our public school system. So we do not do an external norm reference testing. So we're talking apples to apples on all of our assessments within Indiana.
Okay, so just a follow-up then. So what is the rationale for requiring or not requiring?
Not requiring, can you please expand?
Test. So if you got it then, so I'm just trying to figure out those things. So the rationale for requiring it is because?
Well, our legislators specifically wanted accountability.
Okay.
And that was their thought process of this is the one area that they could say, here's a test, we're pointing to this is working, this is not. That was their specific.
Okay. Just one last question for you, and probably I'm trying to think on the end there. I forget your name. It's Dipple?
Dipple.
Yeah.
Colleen.
Well, but Tina, no, one question, because I want Ms. Dipple to follow up on it. I think my district, one of the districts that I represent, has probably one of the biggest in the state of homeschoolers. And so what protections do homeschool families and private school families have in particular?
So specific to when in Indiana, we have a very clear definition of a homeschooler. So once they accept ESA funds and state funds, they are no longer homeschoolers. We call them educate at home. I did build a relationship with the largest homeschool network in the state because of that, and being able to build that relationship and ensure that we were respective of both of our intent to educate.
Okay, good. So, Ms. Dipple, I'm gonna go to you. What is the best way to serve our homeschool families?
Well, so what we do now is we refer families who are interested in homeschooling, we refer them to the Texas Homeschool Coalition, and they provide them with guidance and support to do that. I think homeschooling in the context of an ESA, would potentially provide, parents with more resources to make decisions at home and to purchase educational materials. So, I think that this would provide probably more opportunity than current folks have right now if they were assigned dollars to homeschool.
Okay. Are you familiar with North Carolina's ESAs?
No, I'm not familiar with the North
Okay.
Carolina ESA.
Well, you had mentioned something, and go ahead, Michael.
No, I was going to hear your question. They're in our administrator network, so I've heard them present before, so I was curious what your question was going to be about North Carolina.
Well, it was mentioned before, they allow ISDs to participate in addition to, into private schools. They participate in ESAs. And so I think Chairman Dutton had mentioned that to you, and you kind of said we're all on the same page on that, talking to Colleen.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, that's,
Right.
again, it's a decision that the legislature would make when writing this policy. But I would think, again, I stated in my opening statement, we do partner with district schools. And we did a survey last year for Austin ISD. We are proud of partnering with ISDs, and I think that there are district schools that want to innovate and need more tools to do that. And if homeschool parents could take courses at district schools, I don't know why that wouldn't be something that we would consider.
Good.
I shared as well that Utah's law allows that. So any district can be a provider, or a charter school can be a provider. They can serve up programs, curriculum, whatever it is they would like, extracurricular, and they attach a fee to it. And as I shared, some of our largest districts have already jumped in to be providers in this very first year.
And we also know from polling data from parents that they do want that. They want a blended education model between public school and other providers. They don't want to give up an entire public school coursework because they know that there are some classes there that work for them. So having public schools and ISDs to be providers is something that we know that parents want overwhelmingly from surveys.
Okay. Well, Michael, help me, because we kind of talked around this. How do we strike a balance between accountability and efficiency?
So for us, we advocate for parent options. So for us, anything that centers parents and what they want and need should come first. We do know from accountability that there is more than test-based accountability. There's program satisfaction. There's parent surveys about how they feel their children are learning. We know about growth in programs, so we can see that programs continue to grow over time and are continuing to retain parents, that those parents feel that they are successful. So for us, we do believe in test-based accountability. We also believe in more than just test-based accountability when looking at whether these programs are successful. So for striking a balance between those two things. So we believe in transparency, giving parents information on these programs. In a variety of states, there are, as part of the online marketplaces, parents can rate providers. That's something
Mike, I'm going to interrupt for a minute. Public testimony, registration for public testimony is going to close here at 3 o'clock. Just want to make that announcement. So go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we know that parents can provide that feedback on how providers are working for other parents. That's something that we think could work well in other states, because parents are, for the most part, the toughest critics when determining how vendors work for their children.
Okay. And I heard Utah say they had the 10,000 at the 200%. Michael, I'm gonna ask you what student prioritization do you recommend? So am I talking like low income, first come first serve, merit based? What would be your recommendation?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Representative. So we don't have hard and fast numbers, whether it's 200% or 250%. But if there is a prioritization, we do think incoming kindergartners, special needs students, and the lowest income students should be served first. Where those lines are drawn is obviously a question for the legislature. But generally speaking, the lowest income special needs and incoming kindergartners are the most sort of group that needs to be accounted for first.
I want to jump back to rural. This is my last question. In your survey of states, is there a program that you can point to that services rural students the best?
I'd say there's a variety of programs that serve rural states.
Give me the best one.
So Indiana does a pretty good job. About a third of our students in the voucher program are rural students. West Virginia also has a new program. It's a very rural state. It's still new, but there are about, I think last time I checked, about 8,000 students that are in the West Virginia ESA program from all across the state, including rural areas. There's parent groups there that help get the word out there, like Colleen's group. So I'd point to West Virginia as an example of a state that can serve rural students well, because it is an extraordinarily rural state, and also West Virginia, in Indiana, that has a robust program, been around for 2011, and we serve about a third of our students in rural areas.
All right. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Chairman Buckley.
Thank you. Just a couple of things I think that I want to make sure is clear in the record. More than 80% of private schools in Texas teach special education kids. They have special education programs. It's true, there are 51 campuses that are special education only, including one in my district that basically provides education for kids with autism. So I just wanted to be very clear that there are private schools all over Texas that have special education programs. The average tuition in a private school in Texas is $6,800. Now, if you move outside of that to maybe some of the more specialized schools, that would increase. But those are just the numbers. Those are the facts. And I want the record to reflect the actual factual numbers of what's going on in Texas. Representative Hefner, you have a question?
I was going to ask, in the ESA program that y'all have seen in your experience, what of whatever the amount is, what percentage has it broke down kind of in spending as far as tuition, tutoring, and instructional materials in the first year?
So I can speak for Arizona. When their program first started, it was around 90% were used for tuition, and then the rest was for tutoring, textbooks, curricular materials, and those things. I know that number has gotten larger, and the amount of families that are customizing has gotten larger. I don't have the updated data on what percentage of that is, but we do know that generally speaking, these programs start out as programs for tuition-based schools, and then as they get older and more mature, grow into more specialized programs.
I'll just add, the latest numbers I've seen from Arizona is less than 70% of the ESA funds in Arizona are now being spent on private school tuition and fees. So over 30% is being spent in ways that sort of fully customize a child's education.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Representative Hinojosa.
Thank you, Chairman Buckley. I'd like to speak to Indiana, and I have no clarity on what is your ESA program and what is your voucher program, but I would like to know which one of those is the one where about 70% of those enrolled were not in public school before. Is that the taxpayer-funded voucher, or is that the ESA?
I was going to say that's not the ESA. I'm going to hand it over to Michael because of the voucher program.
So the voucher program. Yeah, the voucher program is the one that before last year was only for switchers, only for students that were going from public schools to private schools. And there was about 66,000 kids, 66,000 kids in that program.
Okay,
so that one.
Well, earlier, it seems like earlier there was a question about what percentage were in public schools before, and I heard 30%
is ESA, correct.
So about 70% were never in public schools before.
That is correct,
Okay.
yes.
And then I have a question, Dr. Wolf, for you. This is what you primarily study, am I correct, these types of programs?
Correct.
And you did state earlier 30 different studies that you've just cited. And I'm wondering how many of those studies and which ones were conducted within the last decade?
So for the evaluations of the competitive effects of private school choice programs, Gosh, I'm imaging I'm looking at the table in my head. I would say around 10 of the 31 have been conducted since 2018.
And which were those?
They in Florida. There's been a recent study in Florida. There's been a recent study in Indiana. There have been 2 national studies that factor in levels of private school choice in all the states, the 34 U.S. states that have private school choice. Other recent competitive effects studies, Ohio. There's one from 2021 in Ohio that found positive effects of the Ohio Ed Choice program. Those are the ones that immediately come to mind.
Okay. And the one state that you've singled out as not a good model for us to follow is Louisiana, at least on this panel. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And fortunately, that program has been replaced by the Louisiana Gator program, which is very different because it's an ESA program with universal accessibility and light touch regulations. So
right. And so I've done some work following up on your research in this when I saw you were going to be a panel here. And I found you cited one of the big problems with the Louisiana program was open admissions. I'm sorry. Is that true? They weren't allowed to discriminate, and that's what you identified as a major problem with the Louisiana program.
Yeah. No private school is allowed to discriminate. They all have to operate subject to U.S. civil rights laws, so they can't discriminate regarding race, religion, ethnicity, and those protected classes. But with the Louisiana scholarship program, private schools were prohibited from applying any admission standards to students.
Right.
And that's what led 2/3 of the private schools in Louisiana to decline to participate.
So they can't discriminate on race. I'll give you that. I do agree with you on that, at least not legally. But they can discriminate on things like needing special education. And I do believe they can discriminate on religion as well, as if they are a religious school. And so I take issue with that characterization. But that was a primary concern, is that it was open admissions, correct?
Representative, they cannot discriminate in admissions based on religion. They cannot subject students to a religious test to enroll in their school. That is prohibited under U.S. civil rights law.
Okay, so back to my question. Your big problem with the Louisiana program is that they can discriminate in admissions. They can't discriminate in violation of federal law, but there's lots of other areas. Well, wait, they can discriminate in ways that public schools cannot discriminate, correct?
They were the private schools are not allowed to apply admission standards, and that prevented many quality private schools from choosing to participate. It wasn't the only factor, though. The requirement to administer the state test also was a factor that drove away a lot of private schools.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's important to point out that in public schools in Texas, there are application-based schools all over the place. Oh. If you want to take dual credit courses, you have to pass an exam. If you want to transfer from one school to another school, your behavior and academic record is evaluated. So I think it's important that the record indicate that there are various forms of application requirements in public and private schools. This is not anything unlike what we see throughout the state of Texas.
Well, no public school can discriminate against kids needing a special education. And private schools can do that.
And 80-something% of private schools offer special education courses and or education programs. I think that's important to know. Yeah.
I would just like to fact check this in real time, because this 80% of private schools offering special education services is complete BS, since we're here. And it's been debunked every time it's brought up at this hearing. 80% of private schools serve some kids who are eligible for special education services. That is not the same as a private school providing special education services. So I just want to, I know the voucher.
What's your definition of that?
The-
I mean, what is that a distinction without a difference? If a child is there and learning,
It's a giant difference.
No.
A student who is eligible for special education is different than a school offering special education. A student getting special education. Any special education parent here in the audience can tell you the difference. I know the voucher lobby is tricky with some of these talking points, but I think we got to fact check it before we say it from the chair's position. Thank you.
I think there's a clear track record that parents have the ultimate power when they make a school choice decision, and they're the ones that can decide whether or not the school is meeting the needs of their kids. Let's go on to Chairman King.
Are you sure?
Very sure.
I've been waiting. I want to go back to this rural discussion. I appreciate my colleague from Houston bringing up rural school issues. Not sure how much he knows about being rural, but I actually am a rural representative. And Michael, I'm going to ask you a question. You brought up West Virginia, and I'd submit it's further across my district than it is West Virginia. So my question is, you said they're doing a pretty good job including rural students. And one of my issues has always been in my 19 counties, and many of them cover nearly 1,000 miles of county, one town in them. There is no option for a voucher as far as bricks and mortar. So my question to you is, when you say these rural schools are participating and getting services, are they getting services online through some kind of virtual system? Because if they live in the middle of a 900 square mile county, $750 isn't going to get them one way.
Sure. Representative, thank you for the question. So yes, some students are receiving virtual instruction in those areas. But we also find that little schools will pop up in those places. So there's examples of a parent getting a homeschool co-op getting together in a church basement or a community center in West Virginia. So it's not just a traditional brick and mortar school like you think of it as, like I went to Catholic school. It's not like a Catholic school down the street. These learning pods or micro schools are popping up in these areas. Well, they'll serve 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kids in a particular area, and they can provide multiple parents or instructors can show up there. They also serve these students in non-traditional places. I've seen them in buildings that were vacant. They came in and remodeled buildings and were able to serve students in a classroom setting there, or in former homes that they've partitioned out to be classrooms. So it's not just a traditional school as we think about it, but you can continue to serve students in these unique ways in homes and examples. So in West Virginia, that's happening. Those are popping
So
up.
it's happening virtually, or it's happening in micro type settings, micro schools. But the private school option to go to a private school, it isn't happening for rural Texas, even in West Virginia.
I mean, not in the way that we think about it, no. But I will say
that's
that
the question. Can a rural student in West Virginia or Indiana who truly lives in a rural area participate in that voucher program and be admitted to a private school, and is it feasible to do so? Now, micro schools, home schools, virtual schools, all that exists in rural Texas today. I mean, that's nothing new. That's happening right now. Parents have that choice to do that. My question is, if we're going to create a multi-billion-dollar school system, and the way Texas works, and these are nice round numbers, but about 20% of the kids go to 80% of the districts.
20% of the kids go to 80% of the districts.
Yeah, and 80% of the kids go to 20% of the districts. My 20% tend to get left out. And so what I'm saying is, in rural Texas, if this is going to be fair, and I like what you had said about allowing public schools to participate. You know, we did this several years ago where we created a system where charter schools and traditional ISDs could create partnerships. That's worked great. It's really helped a lot of areas have resources that we haven't always had. But when I hear this is good for all kids, I can show you 19 counties where it ain't gonna help a damn one of them. And now a micro school, a home school, I support every parent's right to pick that. But if I'm gonna have an underfunded public school system, and we're gonna take money and give it to kids in urban settings, I'm all for those kids, but my kids are what's important to House District 88. So I was just trying to clarify, are we actually comparing apples to apples here? And we're not. There's options, and those options exist today. And I'm in support of them. But your testimony seemed to allude to that even in West Virginia, a kid out in the middle of nowhere could apply for his voucher and apply to the private school and go there, and the numbers weren't adding up on the transportation costs.
Sure. Representative, so I think that we have an issue of definition here. So for us, again, ESAs. So for us, vouchers only state, parent, private school, right? The money goes from the state to the parent to the private school. ESAs goes from the state to the parent, and the parent can spend it on a variety of education options. So for us, that's why we support education scholarship accounts, because you can have that flexibility built in. That's why one of the reasons that West Virginia went that route is that they could have that flexibility built in and not just be tied to a traditional sort of brick and mortar private school. So we can have that flexibility. Transportation is definitely important, and I would never speak to how that would work in your district, but I do know that when you look at some of the other states that have very rural areas, those other options pop up where they may not have the population to support a traditional brick and mortar private school, and we want to continue to support and promote those kinds of education opportunities as well.
Thank you for that.
If I could add to Representative King's question. So nationally, 70% of public schools located in rural areas, that is areas defined by the U.S. Census as rural, 70% of them have a private school operating within 30 minutes of that public school in rural areas. So a surprising number of private schools do exist, and that's not counting micro schools or homeschooling. That's just brick and mortar private schools. And actually, the first two private school choice programs in the United States were created in Maine and Vermont in around 1870, because there were large rural parts of the state that had private schools operating, but not public schools. And so the state paid for the tuition of students in rural areas to attend private schools, and those were the first school choice programs in the U.S.
Well, I appreciate that, Dr. Wolf, and I would submit to you that whoever wrote that stat never visited House District 88. But, because I will tell you, I have 19 counties, more than 60 school districts. I have one accredited private school, and it only teaches preschool and kindergarten. So, Mr. Chairman, and I've had lots of conversations about this. I never oppose a parent's right to choose, and I think there's a way to solve this. But until rural kids are considered part of the student population that we're trying to get a better education for, it makes it a little hard for me to vote for another part of the state and leave mine underfunded. But I'm still willing to work on it.
All right. Appreciate that. We'll do Representative Allison and then Representative Shaver.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following up that last comment, then Texas must be in that 30%. I guarantee you there's a good part of the state that there's not a private school within 30 or 50 miles. And that's one of the problems we got to face. And I hate to get into constitutional arguments, but I think it's following up on Chairman Dutton's questions a little while ago. We have a unique situation in Texas in that I think we're unlike any other state where our forefathers and authors of the Constitution put extreme emphasis on the importance of public education. So we have a constitutional provision requiring the legislature to develop, support, and maintain a free public school system. Part of that, there are other constitutional provisions that set up two funds dedicated to the initial funding of public education, a permanent school fund and an available school fund. Further constitutional provision says those funds can only be used for that purpose and no other. We go on, they cement it even further by saying no public funds can be used, none of these public funds can be used for sectarian purposes. That creates a problem with parochial schools. If we have any private schools in most of our urban areas or even rural areas, suburban areas, they're going to be parochial schools to a large extent. Another provision that Chairman Dutton referred to is a provision that says that public funds cannot be used for purely private purposes. It smacks of that. So we've got those problems we've got to deal with. I don't know that any other state has dealt with them or faced them to the extent we do. And where the rub comes in, that prohibition on the use of those funds means that the only thing available for a voucher program, ESA program, whatever we want to call it, has to come out of the general fund. The general fund promotes and provides for everything else under the Texas budget, including, importantly, the additional needs of public education. So, we're facing a situation where we're going to further harm public education that has been so important to our forefathers, to our public right now. Because everything we spend on a program like this detracts from public education, and particularly the rural areas where there aren't any other options. And I guarantee you, even if there was another option, I think our rural communities, the number one employer, the number one interest, the focal point are our schools, our public schools. And they're going to rally behind that and stay with that. So they're going to be denied those additional funds out of the general fund that are so important. We've seen that, we've heard that. Representative Hinojosa talked about it earlier, the needs we have for public education right now. And if you take it back, I'm not from a rural area, but I'm from the suburban and urban area. I think the harm's even greater there because the urban and suburban areas aren't going to get those additional funds either. But where there's the double hit is that any child that leaves the public school to go under a voucher program, under our current funding system, we lose the average daily attendance payment. And that's sizable. I know one of my school districts, a small one, if they lose 1% of students, they lose $400,000 a year. And right now, that's devastating. A larger district's up in the millions. So I think this is a very serious question we've got to look at, and it's just not an easy answer. And when we talk about try to address the rural areas, I think we're overlooking, and part of the charge is we need to maintain that it's a high-quality school. Well, with what I heard described, certainly it doesn't come close to being a high-quality school. Maybe it's providing some service, but it's not high quality. And I think that's what we owe our students and our families, is high quality. And you see it, I've read reports, and correct me if you see something differently, but you hear reports of these programs doing well for the first year or 2 years and then decline. I think Louisiana, maybe, Dr. Wolf, I think you even wrote an article about the initial Louisiana program declined for the 4-year mark. And I think we see that. We had an experiment in my area in San Antonio years ago. Privately funded attempt to bring up, we had a very poor performing economic deprived school district, Edgewood, performing very poorly. Benefactor, well-meaning, tried to establish a privately funded voucher program. Worked well for the first 2 years. It was pop-up schools that had to be utilized because there wasn't anything else to utilize. They slowly started to fail, send the kids back. Because one thing we miss is, we talk about choice. I think choice is such a misused term and such a misrepresentation because it's not the parent's choice, it's not the kid's choice, it's the private school's choice who they take or who they don't take and who they keep and who they don't keep. And we see that. That's what happened in the Edgewood situation. They started dismissing kids. These pop-up schools failed, understandably, because they weren't of high quality. And so eventually, by the 3rd year, 4th year, all the kids were back at Edgewood. And the worst part of it And I think we see this in some of the other states now. Those kids came back behind, and they left a school that was already pretty far behind, and for them to come back even further behind, that's criminal. And I've read reports recently that these other states that have established voucher or ESA programs, there's a recidivism rate, 20 to 30% come back to the public schools. So what have we accomplished? And particularly then if they come back behind, what have we accomplished? And then you see reports that, and I think it's incumbent on us to look around to other states and see what the experiences have been. I think we're in a unique situation because of size, which is a blessing and a curse. But, we've talked about West Virginia and Indiana, Utah. Those states can fit within Texas. We have 5.5 million kids in our public school system that we've got to deal with. 5.5 million. So you talk about in Utah, I think you said that you've got 1.1 million and it's costing, and you're serving 10,000 kids. You see reports of, I've heard anywhere from 1% to the highest I've heard is from you, Dr. Wolf, 8% are involved in these programs. Well, if we're serving 1% to 8% to the detriment of 92 or 99%, something's wrong. That's just not a good business model any way you want to stretch it. So those are things I think we need answers to and to see. And we've got an obligation and just about a definite obligation to serve special education needs. But there's a wide spectrum of special education needs. It's one thing to deal with someone who has dyslexia. It's another thing to deal with a child who is severely handicapped. And we don't have public schools equipped to deal, private schools to deal with the severely handicapped, not in the numbers that we need. And that's what's important. And I think even under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it's clear that the private schools don't have that same obligation or requirement to serve those kids that are severely handicapped. And that's what we've got to deal with. So when you talk about special education, we've got to look at that entire spectrum to see what we're dealing with. I don't want to sound defensive of our public education system overly, but I think we do a pretty good job with what we have and what we have to deal with it, considering the number of kids we have, the diverse needs and interests. But when we talk about choice, we have a ever-growing charter system that in Texas is part of the public school system, paid for by the taxpayers. We have ever-growing magnet programs that have been tremendous, that meet individual needs and interests. And they're all parent-driven and interest-driven. I know in my area, we've recently, there's magnet programs come up in rocketry, cybersecurity, culinary arts. That's not the school district saying, oh, let's have a culinary arts program. That's driven by the parents. And we meet that need in magnets. STEM programs, CTE programs, dual credit, early college, it goes on. And we have a PEG grant program. I heard a little bit from the commissioner this morning about it's underutilized because I think kids and families want to stay within the public school system if they can and stay in the neighborhood schools. We're special, supplemental for special education services, additional funding. So I think we've reached out and provide all we can, and why we'd want to go to an additional system like this that's not going to serve anyone we're not already serving in a quality way troubles me. So thank you, Chair.
Representative Schaefer.
I just want to echo what Representative King said about our rural districts. And I think some of it goes into the idea of what is rural. And if you've got a Chili's, you ain't rural. The idea that a brick and mortar private school is going to pop up in these communities is just not realistic, okay? Pods are happening. I know even places like Childress, there's little tiny pods of families getting together that homeschool. But members, don't leave out these rural communities. If you're going to create a choice program, don't make it that it just primarily benefits urban areas of the state. All means all when it comes to these students. And I think you need to come up with a way to allow those public schools, Mr. Chairman, allow those public schools to help customize the education of the students that they're already serving. And you could do that with a supplement for those students. If you can come up with a voucher that benefits a kid in urban Houston, maybe that same voucher could be a supplement that a student that stays in school in Turkey, Texas, and now the principal can just sit down with the parents in that public school and say, okay, you've got this supplement money, parents. What do you want to do with it? Hey, we'd like a robotics program. Can we do that? Sure, we can do that. We've got a facility. We could help. There's a way that we could do that with extra money. That's an idea, but members, please don't leave behind the rural schools.
I agree. Mr. Chairman, real quick, since he brought it up, I can't let this go. He brought up Turkey, Texas. Most
Okay.
of you don't know that that is a home of Bob Wills. Turkey, Texas has a consolidated school district called Valley. Ms. Jenkins is probably listening, finest school district in the state. Thanks, man.
Chairman Dutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a member of this committee, I certainly support rural schools. And I certainly think that, we have to be cognizant of Turkey, Texas. But as an urban member of this committee, what bothers me more than anything is that this, either openly or benignly, will cause a resegregation of public schools. And I'd like to have you all's comment on that, because there've been lots of written words about how this conflicts with the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision.
Representative, as well as anyone, I mean, the sad reality is that most urban public schools are terribly segregated by race because they are enrolling students based on their address, and race. People are concentrated by race in neighborhoods in many of our urban communities. And so the residential assignment system that drives enrollment in public schools tends to reproduce that racial segregation in those public schools. And so the studies that have been done on the effects of private school voucher programs on the racial integration of schools that students leave and schools that students go to under these programs actually tend to find that these programs are racially integrating. They are net integrating in their effect because they're most popular among African American kids who are concentrated in highly segregated public schools.
I don't mean
in
to
the
cut you off,
inner city.
but can you give me the name of one of the studies?
Sure. I co-authored a study, the Louisiana Scholarship Program, and even though that program had a negative effect on student test scores, it actually had a positive effect on school integration.
Is that why they ended it?
You would have to ask the legislators of Louisiana that question.
Okay. I mean,
So,
okay, can I hear your?
So our demographic aligns to Indiana's demographic. It's very reciprocal. So respectfully, we're not seeing that in Indiana. And I can wholeheartedly empathize with your comment. I just don't have the data to prove what your statement was.
And otherwise either.
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So, as I said, and I'm not a researcher, we're not a think tank, we're a service organization, we're a do tank, we do, right? We serve. And what's interesting is, as I said in my opening statement, 89% of the families we serve are families of color. 95% of the folks that we serve directly are women. They're mothers. And 59% are living on $50,000 a year or less. I taught in HISD. I taught at Port Houston on the east side of the district, Port Houston Elementary, and it was pretty segregated school. It was almost 100% Hispanic. I think we had one African American teacher, and at the time, and I think 2 white teachers, and it was a very segregated school in the sense that it was homogenous, and that has a lot to do with our district lines, how those lines are drawn, an inability, just a lack of interest within the sort of traditional, not the magnet schools of.
Let me cut you off there because therein lies, I think, the point I'm trying to make here. One of the reasons it happened in HISD was because when HISD settled the desegregation lawsuit based on Brown, HISD, and you can look at the testimony and you'll see this, it says, they said they were going to create magnet schools on the west side of town to stop white flight away from the district. That's what it says. And so that's why on the east side of town, which is what I represent mostly, it was still segregated. And most of the children in my district get on a bus to go across town every morning just to get an education, which is almost criminal.
Yeah, I mean, I'd advocate for open enrollment across the state, let's get rid of all of these lines and have open enrollment and give parents the flexibility to choose a school that works for them. I mean, and what we hear from our families is actually that's what they want, right? So lowering the barriers to those choices is something, that's why we're having thousands of people ask for help, because they are looking and they're not interested in segregating schools, at least the parents. What they're interested in is finding the best fit for their child. So that's not our experience, but we'd be happy to.
Right, but if the private schools all locate on the west side of town, I think you have more of an egregious effect on Brown versus Boyd.
We also have a baby bust in lots of places, and we have lots of demographic changes that are affecting all kinds of issues. And so, I think that these are really complicated challenges.
Well, that's
that
what I said
districts are
about
struggling
integration
with.
too.
So the one demographic that I was able to share with you today is that all 10,000 of our recipients fall into our lowest income preference level. And I think that's pretty impressive and speaks for itself. In terms of the other data on demographics, I don't have that yet. The program manager hasn't released it because the program is so new that will have to be reported to our legislature this fall. So at that time, that could be shared. But for now, what we do know is that everyone that received it was in the low income bracket.
Are you using low income to mean both poor whites and blacks, or just poor blacks?
Poor any color.
Okay, that's what I thought. So
Yeah, I don't have the other demographics yet. That data hasn't been released. The program's so new. It will be reported to the legislature.
all right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any additional Representative Hinojosa?
Can anybody on this panel give me any data on what percentage of English language learners, or we used to talk about English as a second language students you have enrolled?
I can't speak to that. I can find the Indiana, I guess we said, produces a report every year. I can find that report and share that information with you.
Does anybody else have any data on that?
It's like Indiana ESA is 3%.
3% English language learners?
Yes. Again, 555 students.
Right. Okay.
Managing expectations.
Okay.
And in the private school choice programs I've evaluated in Washington, D.C., Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the state of Louisiana, participation by English language learner students was approximately the same as their representation in the general population. So they were not over participating, but they weren't under participating.
In
either.
DC,
DC, Milwaukee, and the state of Louisiana. Yes.
and the state of Louisiana. So in the DC and Milwaukee, those are older evaluations, right? The state of Louisiana, that's older data. The state of Louisiana, is that the discontinued program, or is that the new program?
Yeah, it's the discontinued program. Our evaluation was 2011 through 2019. Milwaukee, our evaluation was 2006 through 2011, and DC, it was 2004 through 2010.
So nothing from this decade, within the last decade. We don't have any information about.
Louisiana was within the last decade.
I thought you just said it was
2011 through 2018.
Okay, I see. So that was the new Louisiana program or the old Louisiana
The
program?
old Louisiana program that's being replaced by
Okay,
the.
so we don't have any data on any programs right now for English. That's a big population in Texas, and so.
Yeah. I don't have data on a program, but I will say from a demand perspective, when I said before we make 80,000 calls last year, like talked to parents, 60% of those were in Spanish. All those calls are recorded, so every single call is logged in Salesforce and 100% recorded. 60% of those are in Spanish. So there is demand among Spanish-speaking families for more options, right? And so that is it's an important quality to consider as you're crafting this policy.
So there's demand, but we don't know if anybody's admitting these students. I ask it because to Chairman Dutton's question about discrimination, on my social media, I hear constantly that people don't want to send their kids to public schools because they're filled with illegals. And so when I look at now the Latino population, that's mostly who is in our public schools. It concerns me that now that we finally have a majority of our students are Latinos, is the time when we're not funding our schools and people want out, right? And so I think it'd be pretty important to have some kind of information, some kind of data on whether any of these programs are actually admitting students who are English language learners.
I'd be happy to pull that data from Florida as well. Step Up for Students that administers the Education Savings Account program in Florida, as well as a variety of their other choice programs. They provide that data. I'm happy to pull that report and send it to you as well.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Tallarico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief comment on Representative Hinojosa and Chairman Dutton's remarks. And I think it's important for the committee to remember that although we've been debating vouchers ad nauseum over the last year, feels like Groundhog Day every time we have these hearings. But the first voucher was proposed in this state, in this legislature in 1957, 3 years after Brown v. Board. And it was a deliberate attempt to allow wealthy white students to leave newly integrated schools. And if you read the Wall Street Journal, not exactly a liberal outlet, just did an analysis where they showed across the country voucher programs disproportionately help wealthy families who are already sending their kids to private school. So it's not going to help rural Texas for sure, but it's also not going to help urban and suburban Texas, which I represent. It doesn't help anybody except the rich, and that's my concern. And I hope we will stop it again next year like we have since 1957.
Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel. We're enjoying a lot of questions here. I got to tell you, one silver lining to this long series of somewhat hostile questions you've been facing is it's renewed my faith in some of my friends and colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I've never seen this amount of attention to scrutiny over potential appropriations in our budget, especially given the fact that we blew our own budget by over 21% just last biennium. So I'm kind of heartened to hear that. So me neither. Thank So we've hit a lot of topics here, and there's a lot of stuff I feel like we're taking for granted that are sort of like implicit assumptions in the questions you're receiving, almost like there's a lot of zero-sum thought going on here. Like if a family gets an ESA, then non-ESA families are somehow harmed. I would love to know if there's any empirical data to show that. Research, Professor Wolf.
Representative, yeah, as I testified, this question has been closely studied, and the test scores of students who remain in public schools tend to increase when those schools are pressured by school choice programs. So you know, there isn't any evidence that the students who decide not to choose and not to switch schools are harmed in any way by the operation of these programs.
Interesting. That's consistent with the peer-reviewed literature that I'm familiar with as well. There's also been a lot of discussion, and I think it's an important topic and well worthwhile, the discussion of children with disabilities, SPED families. That if there was an ESA program launched in Texas, as there has been in over 32 other states already, we are not exactly talking about blazing any new trails here, just for the record. Okay, I wish that Texas had been the first state to empower parents with education freedom, but sadly, we're taking up the caboose here if we do this next year. All right, this is not exactly novel, new territory. Are there any students, and is there any empirical data from any of the 33 states that have enacted parental choice, where people who had students with disabilities who were being served in the public school system in those states, or have there been any proposals in the state of Texas, any legislative proposals here, when we've been debating ESAs that you're aware of, where a student would be forced to leave their current ISD, where their student is receiving the services that are benefiting those child? Is there any relevance, is there any reason to think or be worried that a child would have to leave their current ISD and attend a private school through some kind of compulsory act by the state if school choice was enacted in the state of Texas?
Representative, no.
No.
I mean, this is all done through parent action. If the parent is happy with where they are, they can continue to stay there and should continue to stay there.
Oh, so they could stay?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Because from the way and the tone of the questions, you wouldn't know that. Because it's almost like people don't take a step back when they talk about, well, what will the private school say if a child or a parent goes to that private school? People are forgetting to ask, why is a parent talking to the private school in the first place? Are the parents going and looking to alternative education options if the public school is serving their kids well? And I heard multiple people here on the dais say that the parents have spoken and they're going to stay in their public schools, and by and large, that's probably true. Would any parent, regardless of their student is disability, SPED, or otherwise, be forced to ever leave an ISD under any ESA program ever contemplated in this country in any state?
I've never heard of that.
I'm sorry, Representative. Could you ask that question again? I apologize.
Would any student have to leave their ISD under any ESA program ever contemplated in any state in this country?
No, sir.
Okay. We were talking recently, too, about discrimination. Is it or is it not true that under our current government education monopoly, that it is in fact predicated on a basis of geographic and wealth discrimination? Is that true or is that not true? Any of you on the panel?
Representative, I mean, school districts base their boundaries on residential assignment. That necessarily, encompasses the people that live there. We know from historical records that redlining is a real issue, that there are areas of this country and in large urban districts, including my own of Indianapolis, where certain areas were not given preferential loans and forced low-income families to reside there. And that's the basis for a lot of the residential assignments around our school districts. We do know that yes, in fact, that there are areas based on public schooling public school districts where wealthier people reside because of the schools there and not in other places. I mean, that's well documented.
That's very helpful, and you're right. It's absolutely well documented. And one thing else I hear a lot, it's just repeated over and over, that public schools take everybody. Do wealthy, high-performing ISDs take kids from low-income area, underperforming ISDs if they show up at their door?
They are not required to do that.
They're not required to do that?
Required to do that.
No, that's correct. That's
I've
correct.
had superintendents tell me that.
So, and I appreciate some of my colleagues' being interested in fact checking. It was just asserted a second ago that we're not funding our public education. I would remind everybody of the witness or the testimony of the TEA commissioner this morning that testified that we've in fact never funded public education in the state of Texas at a higher rate than we are right now. And also Arizona was mentioned a second ago. I don't know if any of you are experts in the Arizona case, but you're right. There was a memo from the governor, and there's been a lot of headlines as a result of this. Budget shortfalls in Arizona. People scream about that, but there's a lot of line items in any state budget, right? Education is one line item in the state of Arizona. Is it correct or is it not correct that the K-12 budget line item in the Arizona budget is in fact experiencing a surplus right now?
I can't, Representative, I can't speak to the historical data of Arizona funding their education, but one thing that I will say is that one of the things that states can do is look at enrollment growth in these programs and make determinations on how they want to spend that money.
Yeah.
If you have that, I'd love to
no,
hear.
I do have the data. They are, in fact, their K-12 budget is experiencing a surplus. It's really hard for one line item that's experiencing a surplus to cause a net deficit in the overall budget, right? That's tough, right? Also, the ESA revenue in their budget accounts for less than 1% of the Arizona budget. So I just need to, since we're fact checking, I do appreciate that. Just felt the need to correct the record on that. You mentioned, Dr. Wolf, at the top of your testimony that you used the term, and it kind of just rolled off your lips, kind of glossed over it. I want to come back to this real quick because you talked about economically disadvantaged students and that ESA has helped them. And I'm curious, how can that be? Because I hear nonstop all the time that this is just a welfare program and entitlement for the rich, and the private schools are simply going to skim. Has that been the experience in states where you work, as well as Florida, that it is only the highest achievers that benefit from this program, that it's only the wealthy that benefit from school choice programs?
Representative, the programs in existence disproportionately serve students from low-income families. Now, some of them
Hang on, whoa. You said disproportionately help the rich? Is that what you said?
No, no.
Say it one more time, a little slower, because I'm not sure I heard you.
They disproportionately serve students from low-income families.
Oh, okay. How about that? So in terms of wealthy families juxtaposed against poor families, which group has more education options than the other?
Wealthy families, Mr. Representative Harrison, have long had more options because, as Michael alluded to, it's easier for them to switch residencies in order to access a higher performing public school. And also it's long been easier for them to self-finance private schooling. So in a sense, a universal school choice program levels the playing field for low-income families and provides to them the options that in many cases are only available to wealthy families.
So which of the two groups, the wealthy or the poor, would experience a disproportionate benefit relative to the other?
The poor would. Representative.
Absolutely. It would help the poor a lot more than it would help the rich. And just to close the loop here, because again, there's a lot of implicit assumptions in some of the questions that I just find really, really appalling, and something that I did not know would be a controversial statement, but I just want to state for the record, as a father of 4 young kids, I'm very interested in the student perspective too, but I take my children's opinions under advisement, and I firmly believe that we as the state of Texas should trust parents to make the best educational choices for their kids and not the government. Thank you for being here.
Chairman Dutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe you meant this, but this is what I heard. In answer to Representative Harrison's question about discrimination, you started alleging that there was discrimination in all kinds of other areas, and that seemed to suggest that this was no problem discriminating in regards to the voucher.
I apologize, Representative. I didn't mean to imply that discrimination was okay in any aspects, and we should abhor that in every aspect. So I apologize if that came across.
Okay, but you started identifying areas where discrimination exists. Do you recall that?
Representative, I was trying to talk about historic discrimination in terms of housing,
Yes.
the home loan program after World War II. We had the government agency, a federal government agency that gave out preferential loan treatment to wealthier areas and specifically denied those loans to
Yes.
areas of black families, which was abhorrent. If you there's a book called A Fine Line. You can see that those current areas that were quote unquote redlined greatly follow a lot of urban school districts' residential assignments, and we want to break that if we, in any way we can.
So, okay, so you didn't mean an answer to his question, but that was a justification for discrimination in terms of this voucher program.
I apologize. There is no justification.
Okay, I was wondering why you were
discrimination.
explaining it that way, because it didn't, I don't know, it sort of rubbed me the wrong way, but.
I apologize,
All right.
Representative.
And let me ask you a question. You said that in competition, that because the vouchers offered some competition, it caused the public schools to do better.
Correct.
Did I say that
yes,
right?
That's correct, Representative.
How many students left? What's the maximum number of students that left a particular school campus?
I don't know that number, Representative. I mean, it is typical for single-digit percentages of students to leave a particular public school that's faced with competition. But what often happens is then that school responds in very constructive ways. They communicate more effectively and more extensively with parents. They launch new programs targeted toward
Do you have a
the
school by
students.
name you can tell me about that did that?
I know there is a study of Florida, of school choice competition in Florida. It's called Feeling the Florida Heat. And the lead author is Cecilia Rouse, who was the head of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama. And in that study, they found that many Florida schools were responding to competition in these constructive ways, communicating better, launching new programs for targeted demographics of students, and removing their lowest performing teachers from the classroom and replacing them with better performing teachers. And so that's one of the 27 studies to find that competition has a positive effect on public school
That could have been done
performance.
without the voucher program, though, right?
Excuse me?
That could have been done without the voucher program, though. Removing bad teachers.
It didn't happen for schools that didn't face competition from the voucher program. So the nature of the study was to compare districts that are pressured by the voucher program, where there are a lot of private school providers that could draw students, compare that to districts that are not pressured by the voucher program. And in those districts that weren't pressured, you didn't see any of that constructive response.
Did those campuses now have fewer students, obviously, who were taking advantage of the voucher, correct?
Excuse me?
These campuses had fewer students based on the fact that they were losing students to the voucher, right?
Yes, Representative. They would have fewer students, and as one of the other panelists mentioned, oftentimes that can be helpful for a public school if some students who really for whom the school is really not working out, if they transfer out through a choice program, then the school can concentrate more resources on the students who remain.
So they wouldn't necessarily have the remaining campus wouldn't necessarily have less money.
It's complicated. It depends upon the funding system, but most states fund public school enrollment based on previous year enrollment. So if you lose a student the first year, there's no net loss of resources. It only kicks in later on when prior year enrollment counts go down.
So taking a snapshot at what they were doing this year might not be representative of what happens in that second year after the students are gone.
These studies did track performance over time, over multiple years, and did find that student performance tended to go up for these schools that were pressured by competition, even after several years.
Even after the money went down.
After some of the money went down, Representative, you probably know that not all of per pupil funding is enrollment based. Just a portion of it is.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Chairman King.
Well, I just have a kind of a follow-up, and it actually doesn't have anything to do with my opinion of a voucher. I want to talk about the structure of it, and some of y'all talked about it a little bit ago, and been a lot said, and I can't remember who said what. When we talk about standardized testing, can you tell me, of the 34 states that have a voucher program, what states have the same test for the voucher recipient in a private setting versus that they do in their public school? And I ask that because that's a huge contentious issue as we've debated this forever, is if we're going to have the STAR test or a norm reference test. And I just wanted to know how the other states are doing this.
So Indiana, those students are required to take the state test. Tennessee students are required to take the state test. The previous Louisiana program, as we talked about, requires students to take the state test. And South Carolina was one of the states. They're moving towards a norm reference test now. And my other panelists say Ohio is the state that I missed.
Okay, and so in those states where and I don't want to go through the argument for norm reference, but I do understand one of you, Dr. Wolf made the point that a lot of these institutions, because their curriculum's different, don't want to be held to the same test that happens in a public school. Fair enough, fair argument. But of the ones that do take the same test, what is the data? What does the data show, test score wise, of the kids that left on the voucher program or ESA or whatever we're calling it this month to the ones that stayed in their public school?
So, as I previously mentioned, Representative, in my evaluation of the Louisiana program, we found that the scores of the choice students on the state criterion reference test were lower than the public school students.
But that's a system that no longer exists.
That's a system that's being
What about
replaced.
the ones that are
Yes.
that we've
So
got
the
all these
ones-
other states trying
Sure.
to tell us how to do it?
Right. So Indiana, as was discussed earlier, the evaluation of the Indiana program, which is still ongoing and still in its early phases, but in its early results, it reported that test scores in English language arts were comparable for the students in the choice program compared to the students in public schools.
So not better, not worse.
Not
same.
better, not worse. They were lower for the choice students in math in Indiana. And in Ohio, there was an evaluation, again, not a random assignment evaluation, but an observational study in Ohio. And they concluded, this was by David Figlio, I forget who his co-authors were, but David Figlio was the lead author. And they concluded that the students in the Ohio choice program scored lower on the public school test than the students in the public school comparison group. So the states that are reporting lower test scores for choice students are exclusively the states that are requiring those choice students to take the public school test.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the states that don't require the same test, I'm assuming they give them some kind of test, norm reference, something that they consider to be comparable. And you're not comparing quite apples to apples there, but the apple to orange. How are the students doing in those states versus the school they left?
So those are the studies that use a norm reference test, and they'll test the choice students, and then they'll test a control group of students who applied for the program, didn't get in, and attended public schools. And they'll apply the same norm reference test to both of those groups.
Right.
So it is apples to apples, but it's using a neutral test that isn't anchored to any particular curriculum. Those are the evaluations that consistently show some positive effects of choice programs on test scores.
I guess my issue with that is when we get away from hard data that is gathered by the various states' education agency. You know, we know this many kids took this test. This is where they came out in math, reading, whatever. Versus a sample group and a study and stuff. You know, it gets you back to The old adage about statistics, you know, there's lies, damn lies in statistics. We don't like that. I want to know if there's hard data from these other 34 states that can mathematically, positively, conclusively show these kids left and their academic outcome is substantially higher than the kids that stayed. Now, I know there's lots of reasons to leave, lots of reasons for school choice, and that's up, parents make choices for a lot of reasons. I'm just trying to find out from an academic success standpoint, is there any of these 34 states that can show any measurable outcome difference in the kids that took the voucher and left versus the kids that stayed?
So, Representative, again, if a neutral test is administered, then we have a record of successful performance of the choice students.
But that hasn't been done yet.
No, the previous studies have done that. Studies of Washington, D.C., New York City, Dayton, Ohio.
Exactly, but once again, you're giving me study results, not data collected from the education agency of the various state. That includes all kids. That hasn't been done?
The only study I know of, because I led it, that found that looked at the effect of choice student performance on the public school test compared to public school students on the public school test to find positive achievement effects was the Milwaukee evaluation. We reported that wrapped up in 2011. And we found in the fourth and final year of our evaluation that the choice students' scores on the public school test were higher in ELA, comparable in math.
Okay. Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I only wanted to revisit that because as we go forward into the next session and this debate continues, we ought to be able to find an answer to that question. What are we actually buying? Are we buying a better outcome? Or are we buying choice for other reasons? I think that's important to whatever bill is proposed to us.
Chairman Dutton.
Or maybe we ought to require that if your kid doesn't do better, the parents have to pay the money back.
All right. Representative Harrison.
Can we have the same deal apply to public schools if you're one of the parents of one of the 60% of kids who aren't reading and writing and doing math at grade level? Thank you.
All right. Any more questions from the members? All right. Well, we appreciate the panel's time. We appreciate you taking all the questions. Appreciate all the questions from my colleagues. Today's charge was simply to look at implementation from states that have done it, for us to be able to gather that information and then inform us as we move forward in Texas. And you've done an excellent job in providing that for us. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Have fun in Indiana. My husband's from Indianapolis.
Watching takeover on public education. They don't have a clue.